My name is Kim Waits. I'm the Wilderness Stewardship Coordinator for Wild Alabama. We have a strong partnership with the National Forests in Alabama to steward our three federally designated wilderness areas, Sipsey, Cheaha, and Duggar Mountain. I'm a C Crosscut Sawyer instructor, and I've trained dozens of Forest Service staff and volunteers across the Southeast. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce our speaker today. Dan Dueweke has personally sharpened the crosscut saws we use to steward the wilderness areas in Alabama. He was the provider of a saw that I acquired a few years ago, beautiful crescent taper champion tooth that I've lovingly named Tenacity. Dan Dueweke is a Crosscut C Sawyer instructor and evaluator for the Forest Service, and he volunteers with the crew on the North Country Trail in northern Michigan. He's been a crosscut saw filer for about 25 years and has attended multiple sessions with Wilderness Skills Institute at the Cradle of Forestry. Before moving to Michigan in 2019, he maintained sections of the Appalachian Trail and wilderness trails in the Shenandoah National Park and taught classes on traditional tools and grip hoist rigging. Dan will be discussing the use of axes, wedges, and other accessory tools such as underbucking tools, hanging wedges, silky saws, and more. Take it away.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone to come that came to this today. And I'm going about this sort of the way I would go about packing stuff into my pack if I was going to go out and clear trail. Dolly Chapman's talked more about saws themselves than I ever need to, but there's a little few things I put in my toolkit that I find helpful and I've learned to use in various ways over the years. So we'll launch into that, especially with the first and most important tool of all. What's under your hard hat, okay? I always say instructions are on the back. Anybody following me down the trail has to see that. I've considered putting it on a t-shirt. I think if people get hurt badly doing these pursuits, it's coming from over their heads. So I'm always telling people, look up when I'm not telling them to pull straight. I'll start with axes. Before I hit the trail, I'll go down, I'll pick out the saw I want to take, and then I'll think, which axe do I want to bring along with me? I tend to like a shorter handled axe in the 28 to 30 inch range. And you can usually tell which axe I'm using the most by the condition of its handle. Which one's scarred up with the most underbucking marks, which has the right kind of, quote, patina on the handle, which is the most sweat stained. And you can see that the one on top, small axe, 2.5 pound, and that's my normal carry, although that one in the middle is a second favorite. I always look at people's axes when I'm out on the trail, when I'm with crew, especially with new people, because I consider that axe to be a reflection of them. What shape is it in? I mean, this is your accompanying tool. You have your saw, you have your axe, and then there's going to be other things, but those are the two main ones. And I like to be able to see my reflection in it. So I'll say your axe is a reflection of you as well as you should be able to see your reflection in it. And if not, get down to the shop and start tuning it up. I like a nice thin cheeked axe, especially for underbucking because it'll stick in the tree. Most people will argue about sticky axes, but I want something that's going to stick when I swing it for underbucking. And I would say those are my top three: my saw, my axe, and a couple wedges. Now I probably have 3 or 4 more wedges in my pack and some other tools I can use, other accessories, but by and large, those are my main 3. And they seldom let me down. I like to be able to drive that axe across the kerf to hold it if I have a twisty tree. I'd be able to pound with the pole of an axe. I think double bit axes are cool. I have one on the on the screen behind me, but they're not as easy to pound a wedge with. Okay, I've never much liked double underbucking. It's an opposite way of using an arc of a saw, and you have to push up, and you have to get in sequence or synchronicity with your partner, and it's the opposite action from a top buck. So whenever I can, I'm going to go to single underbuck most of my trees. Okay, now I feel I'm home. I have a nice axe set. I have my saw positioned on it, and I'm going to come in from underneath, and I'm going to have a few more photos coming up on underbucking off that axe handle. Now, there's other ways to do it, but everybody has a favorite. This is my favorite. Living in Michigan, I spend about 6 months of the year doing trail work like this. So I like to have something that's gonna stay in the tree. That's my little 2.5 pound boy's axe doing its job. I like to have that axe out a little bit, and I like to have the saw way down low on the axe handle. I've seen a lot of axes where the handle is all scarred up in the middle someplace. That's a little, to me, that's a little tough. I like to have it far out on the end. You get a little bit more flex with the handle. One doesn't have to have a real thick bucking saw to underbuck with. This is Simon's 325. It's a pretty narrow saw. I like it because when you're sawing from the top, you can get a wedge in a little sooner. Doesn't have much belly. And it seems to hold up pretty well when you're underbucking with it. Go ahead and play a little movie. You can watch that axe handle flex as I'm going back and forth. Ignore what I'm saying. It probably doesn't come out very well, but there you go. I can apply as much upward pressure as I want or not on that axe handle, and it's gonna push that saw up into the tree, and I find I can underbuck just about as fast as I can top single buck when I have it set in right. Things Dueweke said before they hit by the tree. I can't see what's happening on that other side. I'm probably closing turf here fast. I try to get this axe. So people often say, well, I hate underbucking because the back of the saw always chews up my axe handles. So my first question to them is, have you looked at the back of your saw lately? I find that saws, especially the old ones, they've been around a long time. They have chips and nicks and little rust spots. And it's like the serrated teeth on a knife. And you run that back and forth on your axe handle, and of course, it's gonna chew it up. When I'm filing a saw, I like to flip it around, backside up, and do a little draw filing along the top of that axe. Not much, maybe a 64th of an inch at most, just to take those nicks out, smooth those corners out a little bit with sandpaper, and it makes for a real smooth running saw on that axe handle. The mechanical underbuck. This is a tool I've seen used. It seems to me I see more people out of the Western Sawyers using it because they have these huge trees. I've been a lifelong Eastern Sawyer, so if I have a tree that's more than 3 feet in diameter, I'm running for the camera to take a picture of me standing next to it. Generally, the trees I cut are in the 20 to 24 inch range for the bigger ones. So what does that mechanical underbuck do? It's great because you can drive it in solid and it doesn't come out. One of the downsides of using an axe as an underbucker is that if you don't stick it in the log, they tend to back out. These things won't back out. They are solidly in the log. But it's one more thing to carry, and you have to decide you want to drive it in with your axe handle or carry a hammer. That's more weight. And then once you get it in, how do you get it out? I have a really good friend in Virginia who bought the one in the picture. He used it in a number of workshops, and the only time I ever saw him use it was in the workshop because he was demonstrating it. As far as going out in the field, he's like, nah, I just buck off my axe handle. Now, there's another thing that can happen with these mechanical underbucks, and those of you who've been on these sites for a long time probably know what I'm about to put up, but walk through it with me and we can talk about it. I downloaded a couple of pictures from Jim Thode's P-Base photo share site, and this was one taken out west someplace, and it was a huge tree, and the guy's got his big saw on that underbuck driven stoutly into the left side of the tree, which he has decided that's going to be the part that stays, and the right-hand side is going to be the drop side. You can see it had to be a big tree because they were driving in steel wedges, which I don't often see. So as he's working up, you can see that kerf is opening from the bottom. He doesn't have a very much of an offset. Generally, when I'm doing an offset cut, I like it a little wider than that. But he's going up on the correct side because that tree should fall away. But somehow, as it goes through, and these are frame grabs from a short video, the tree drops, grabs his saw, and immediately yanks it toward his face. In the movie, it's a lot more dramatic. He's right now in the thinking Sawyer fight or flight zone. And it happens so fast, he's got a hard grip on that handle, and he barely misses losing his ear and getting his hard hat knocked off as the tree drops. But as you see it, it's bending around. And as a saw filer, I sometimes wonder how saws get so twisted. This is probably a really good example of a saw that's going to have to go back for some hammering. But also revealed in this is probably what happened. And this is something I'm getting more into technique than accessory tool, but it's worth talking about for this group. Remember how he was on the left side of his kerf? Well, he crossed his kerf underneath that tree and he came out on the opposite side. He didn't know he was doing it. These people should have noticed it. Okay, he's got all these people standing on the other side of the tree. They should have been watching what was happening. I might guess that this started as a double underbuck, and he may have told his partner, offset to the left. Well, his left is the other person's right. And because on the other side of that tree, it's being offset to their left. Anytime I tell somebody when I'm underbucking with them to do an offset, I'll point. I said, an inch that way or that way. I never say left or right. Just something to remember for your own skills. And it ends with him safe. I'm not sure the condition of the saw, but just to drive home that last little thing about crossing your kerf, next slide shows it a little better. You can see on that right-hand side, there was a little lip there that was supporting that drop log. And when it finally gave, it grabbed the saw because that was where the saw was. Instead of being on the left side where the saw would have been held back inside that cut, and the log would have dropped freely. So whenever I'm talking underbucking, I always like to stress that part. And finally, think about what that steel underbuck did. It created a pivot point. Now, if you're familiar with pivot points, you know they can do strange things. If you're one end of your tree is up on a rock or a root wad, you didn't see it, and you're thinking you're going to get a drop in one way and it goes in another. That pivot point is a solid. That mechanical underbuck didn't come out. If that had been an axe handle, I'm sure it would have broken, and that saw wouldn't have gotten anywhere near that guy's face. Wedges, hanging wedges. Well, he wasn't using hanging wedges in that other picture, but okay, there's the original hanging wedge and the original hanging wedger. Usually they have two, they put them on a string, and I had to look really hard for the show of, somebody carrying it on their shoulder. I'm sure they didn't want to carry them in their pockets, and I doubt they had backpacks, so it was easy for them to put a loop of string through it. Okay, this guy's carrying it to his tree. I have tended to use them almost exclusively as hanging wedges to control kerf movement and torsion in trees. But in the back of my head, it's always a backup wedge if I have a real tight kerf and it's spitting the plastic wedges like it'll do in frozen wood. Once or twice I've used one of those hanging wedges to hold a kerf open. They're convenient to have and they don't weigh much. The ones I have weigh about a pound a piece. The one on the far right was made for me by a friend who is a blacksmith. And when I looked at the one he'd made me, it was so nice. I said, "Can you make me another dozen?" To which he said, "No." But I got one from him. You'll see I have them on a loop cord. That little loop is a slider. I can adjust how far apart I want these things to hang, have bright colors. I don't want them dropping out of the tree and getting lost in the snow or in the leaves or the dirt. So they're tied together to keep together, as well as to stay above the cut when you're making it. They are skinny. When I talk about profiling my axe, I like a narrow axe. I like a nice skinny hanging wedge, and I didn't even have to create that. That's how they came in the day. They're easy to drive because they're being mostly driven in with the grain of the wood. Of the many uses of fire hose, I find they make great little pouches for those hanging wedges. It's not the sort of thing you want to put in your pocket or even in your backpack. They don't need to be sharp, but they will have an edge. So I'll pack them along in something that'll hold them cleanly and safely. Okay, there's one. By the way, this is May 1st up in Michigan's UP. It's a nice day in the woods in the springtime. Cutting up, we've decided that the left side is going to be the harder drop side. So the Sawyer's making his finish cut as an underbuck. We have some hanging wedges driven across because we weren't sure if the top was going to torsion. And because we have two axes, we have one on the side that we think isn't going to drop as hard. We have those loops held over that axe head so they don't drop down on the saw. From the other side, we have how it looked from the Sawyer's side. The underbucker stayed, just another axe with some notches in it. The tree with the most downward motion drove in hard. There wasn't enough twist to pull those hanging wedges out, but they stayed there on top of that axe head. And if they pulled loose, they would have just dangled from it, most likely. Okay, and I'd say 99% of the people tend to think about hanging wedges as being used to control that torsion, but they can also be used to control the way a kerf opens on a tree. You know, most people, they're worried about their saws getting stuck going down from the top. Well, this was a little bit different one. You can see where the trail is. You can see what's heading for it, and you can look close. It's a double stem. I love a double stem, not. But the end of this tree, far off the left, was sort of hanging out over the air from the edge of that crib wall. After securing that root wad with a Mazdam rope puller and blocking up from underneath it, we started in sawing, and it didn't take too many cuts to see that top was opening really fast. That's usually an indication you're going to have a split or a slab out on a tree. I found that in working with pine trees, I'm not a Western guy, so to me, if it's got needles, I'm gonna call it a pine tree. They tend to snap out a little sooner. The oaks and the hickories, maybe not so much. This was an oak tree. I think it might have been a chestnut oak. But as we started down into it, we could see it starting to wanna maybe split. So we drove those hanging wedges in tight, not so much to control the torsion of the tree, but to keep the end from slabbing up violently. Okay, you can see where the split is starting, but it hasn't split. Those hanging wedges are sort of holding that kerf closed. And then we continued sawing, left one in place on the far side, then took the other one and drove it a little further down. And we kind of walked that kerf open without it actually ever really splitting out in any sort of violence like they can sometimes do. By the time we got down to the very bottom, it didn't matter. You used to driving those wedges in from the top to keep your kerf open. Sometimes in frozen wood, they'll spit out at you. We don't go in very well. It's just too tight, but you're close to the bottom or you're maybe even on the ground and you can't go into underbuck. So what I like to do is pull the saw out, take a couple of other wedges from my mini wedge bag and drive them in. Okay, this case, I don't want to either saw into the ground or get my saw stuck. So I have those wedges just about underneath that saw. I don't mind pulling red and green noodles out of plastic because it doesn't hurt the saw. But before I put the saw back in, I can drive those in really hard. And it's the opposite way of using a wedge that I think people are most familiar with. And as the tree starts going up, you can whack that top wedge in a little bit more and get a better kerf opening, and then saw out the bottom or down into the wedges, clear your tree. If there's still not enough room for an underbuck, but more than you want to stick a wedge under, put a log under it or a rock, then drive your wedge into that. That'll really make a difference in keeping that kerf from closing. So you combine the bottom wedge with the top wedge, and you can saw from the top all the way down to the bottom. And when you're doing that on a tree on the ground, you can do it as a bypass. You can whack those in pretty far from both sides. And then it's not so difficult to put a third wedge in, because now the way they're stacked, they're less likely to slip out. If you have 3 in a row and that wedge angle starts to climb, they're a little bit more likely to spit out from where you're hammering. Okay, not my most typical tool, but I find that there are some times a little bit of rigging can help when I'm doing this work. And I don't want to take a grip hoist up a mountain 5 miles if I don't think I have to, but I've truly fallen in love with the Mazdam rope puller for a number of reasons. They are pretty sturdy for its weight. And on those long walks, I'm always thinking, what's going into my pack? So I'll have some small pulleys, and the project we did was maybe a little bit of a overkill for those little Petzl rescue pulleys, but the other ones were stout. So I have my axe, have my saw, some wedges, some slings, my Mazdam, and some hard hats, and away I go up to clear a blowdown that had fallen across the trail in Shenandoah, and thought it would be better to move the root wad off the trail because it was loose. Again, my favorite, a double trunk. The Sawyers are standing on the trail. There's a big crater in the frozen ground behind it, but you can see that root ball is fully loose. So we considered how we do it. And first, we're to get rid of the stems, get them free of the root wad, and then pull it a little bit sideways with the Mazdam. Okay, stems cleared. You can count the mechanical advantage on that sling. It's in basket mode. You look on top, there's 2 lines. Look on the bottom, you can barely see there's 2 lines. So I'm at a 4-to-1, or the guy pulling it's at a 4-to-1, and we have a slide. We got a skid underneath it that made it pretty easy to pull with that Mazdam. Got it twisted about 90 degrees to the trail, rehitched that Mazdam, got it started, pulled it just far enough so that it was getting close to teeter. In the event that it went, we had it looped over sort of a dead end. It wasn't going to take the Mazdam down the hill. And then one of the guys grabbed a nice long pole, and he just gave it a little uplift, and down the hill it went, and the trail was clear. A lot of weight in that root ball. And talk about things that you make as you go. I mean, I didn't bring an 18-pound rock bar up the hill. I probably could have, but there was plenty of nature's own. We found a nice down tree that was still in pretty good shape. I think the pole we had might have been a locust, which is, I think, second only to rock bar steel and being able to take a hard flex, and just levered it off the trail. Got it out of there. Next is another Mazdam example. Okay, the assessment was that it wasn't just a tree that needed to be or a leaner that needed to be, a hanger needed to be dropped. If you look up, you can't quite see the Widowmaker hanging above it. The size up was when this tree drops, the Widowmaker is coming down. It's going to land right on the trail. It's going to hit who's ever standing there cutting. So we made a little notch on the downside of that sling, attached a Mazdam, and just broke a little hinge. And you can see how it turned out. Boom.
I guess I called
So,
that.
so down it came. That was one of those lookups. We used that Mazdam to move something that would have been hazardous or dangerous to fool with on the ground. Okay, Silky saws. I love a Silky saw for cutting spring poles. I think somewhere in the back of the Silky saw inventor's mind was, we've got to do something to help people cut spring poles. So they are the tool, and I always have one of those little Silky folders in my pack. I didn't have that out in the original picture, but it always lives there. And anytime you're in storm damage, you're coming up on dealing with spring poles all the time. But it's such a powerful little saw. You can saw most anything. You have a little bit bigger tree and you don't want to use your big saw to try and wrestle with it, or you don't want to chop it because it's high and it's going to bounce. You just take that Silky and that big boy will go through that thing in about a minute. And they're also great because they've got a long handle. Many of the time as you approach the release point with your crosscut saw, you don't want your saw in the log because you're never quite sure, even with all your size up, what the log might do when it's released. So it can often be helpful to use that Silky to cut that last little bit of holding wood. Now, Silky saw, I think, is the only tool that I'll use in snowshoes. I don't like to swing an axe or run a crosscut saw when I'm in snowshoes, but to take the snowshoes off and then post hole down to my knees, even worse. But if I'm out on the trail in the wintertime, I definitely am going to have that little Silky saw with me. And it complements my Stormy Cromer hard hat. Okay, this is not my invention. Somebody else made this and they gave me about a dozen of them, and I hand them out wherever I go. I find it so useful, especially at my age. I'm past 70 and I don't like to bend over to lift logs off the trail. It's just a piece of PVC pipe with a 1/8 inch Dyneema cord. 1/8 inch Dyneema cord has a tensile strength of 2,500 pounds, so I don't think I'm going to break that. I'll slide that little guy under a tree or under a log I've cut, and then I can stand back and I can drag it off the trail with my back straight and use my legs. Or I can bring my swamper in. We can each grab a side of a handle and pull a pretty good sized log off a trail. I like doing that with one cuts. I mean, if it's a two cut, you're just going to give it a kick, or you're going to stick a little hand spike under there and roll it off. But if you can do a one cut, I like to do a one cut and just pull the piece to the side if it's small enough to do that. So I think nature and your ideas, you come up with little tools and tricks that work for you in the field. And everybody's an inventor when it comes time to come up with a fix like this. So that pretty much concludes what am going to say today. If you have any questions, you want to chat about this stuff, go right ahead.
Andrew Rogers says, any suggestions for making your own hanging wedges?
Yes, that picture I had of the 4 hanging wedges, the one on the far right was made from a leaf spring. That's where it's helpful to know somebody that's a blacksmith. Those are actually pretty easy to make. If the blacksmith is good and he's got a power hammer, he just heats that piece of leaf spring up nice and hot and then hammers that wedge. I mean, just hammering it out is going to spread the steel. I think leaf spring is probably the number one base element for people who make them. I find them frequently at rummage sales and flea markets. I found a few on eBay. I think the people that know what they are tend to price them a little high on eBay. The last time I saw them, they were going for around 30 bucks a piece. But you can pick them up in flea markets for a lot less than that, or make your own. I know a guy in Wisconsin named Nick Anderson. He's made some out of aircraft aluminum, which essentially does the same thing. It's a wedge. It's like a thin bucking wedge, and you can drive them in on the sides. So yeah, there's other metals, but I think the steel ones are a little stouter.
Okay. I have a question. And this is more out of just out of the technical part of sawing, but thinking about how saws, we take our old antique saws and we refurbish and we baby them, we take care of them. And we hate that we don't lose them, but at times we, one bites the dust and we've got to take that one out of commission permanently. How long do you think that we have a supply of saws? Like, do you think like in 100 years they're just all going to be used and gone? Like,
Well, it
I
depends
don't
on
know
who
if
you
there's any way
use
to
them.
project that.
I would say there are enough saws for hundreds of years, but then people used to say there are enough trees for hundreds of years. Uh, I think what you need to do when you're teaching the classes is, like, let people know how rare some of these tools are. Maybe rare is the wrong word, how special they are. Because even though there's a lot of them around, they're not making them anymore. So you want to treat those saws carefully. I have a friend, the friend that had the underbucker, Patrick. I filed a saw for him 5 years ago, crosscut saw. He uses it regularly, and he says it still cuts fine because he's very obsessive about keeping it out of the dirt, barking his cuts. He takes good care of it as a volunteer. Now he's not using it 12 hours a day, but I find that the volunteers I file saws for generally don't bring them back to me for a couple of years between filings. And usually that is when they've hit something or they put it in the dirt and then it stops cutting properly. And even then, you're only taking just a whiff. I mean, you're talking like fractions of an inch off the tips of those teeth to rejoin them and bring the rakers down a little lower. Uh, there's a lot of videos on YouTube showing people sharpening saws, but there's not many showing people lowering those gullets. When you think of how big the belly is on a Simon's 503, I mean, you can drop that gullet at 8 inches and you'll still have enough saw someday to work with it. It's all in how you maintain it, how you maintain the saw.
Sure. We have a question here in the chat from Josh Burt
Hey,
with
Josh.
American Conservation Experience. I do believe that's what that is. With the one moving part manual, a lot of techniques and equipment from the competition shopping world have been introduced to the trail community at large. I seem to recall that you played around with I'm not even going to try.
Tuatahi.
Okay,
Tuatahi.
work axe for a while. He says, what were your thoughts on that style of axe?
I liked the axe, but it was a bit heavy to carry. I had a friend in Shenandoah who was really, really a big axeman, and sometimes we'd say, let's just take the axes because we need to practice. And I was fortunate enough to get down to New Zealand about 10 years ago to visit my daughter. And before I went down, I ordered two. I ordered one for me and I ordered a second one from him. And so when I came back, we put handles on and we go out into Shenandoah, which was to us kind of a playground for learning how to do techniques. And we chop out all our blowdowns. I found that they really excel in softer woods, even though the work axes are ground for anything. Eddie Fawcett says the grinds he puts on them, you can swing them into anything from like from your hardest oak to your woolly butt. What the hell is a woolly butt? I guess it's some Australian really hard wood, and they haven't been able to chip or turn an axe. What can chip them though, and I think this is true for all axes, is a hemlock knot. You got to be careful when you're chopping in really knotty wood, especially hemlock, because those little knots are like hard as glass. But I've used them. I wouldn't say it's my go-to axe, because usually when I'm out on the trail, I have an axe and a saw and some of these other accessories that I had today. So it's going to be a lighter axe, and to use that big tuatai as a hanging axe, perhaps not.
I have a
Um,
quick question.
Go
Dan,
ahead.
can you please share the video where you took the snips to show the pictures of the slab out and that saw? You said that was actually a video. Would you
Oh yeah, yeah. Are you familiar with Jim Thode?
yeah, yeah,
He's a Sawyer out in Washington State. I think he's from Onalaska, Washington. He's got a web hosting or a photo hosting site he uses called Pbase, Pbase, and he has a lot of stuff on it. I think under his name, and it's open. You would just have to go to that site and look for crosscut saws, and that danger offset release is in there as a video. It happens really fast, which is why I took it out as little frame grabs, because from the time that thing lets go until the time it's over is like, how?
sure.
And it's scary because when you think of how fast that happened and what could have happened, I mean, that Sawyer could have really been injured with that scenario. It's it's something to consider when you're using those underbuckers.
Okay, copy that. P base. Got it. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Mhm.
So I have a question, Dan. Looking back on your years and experience, is there a particular day of sawing that stands out to you? I mean, I know I personally have some myself, that would it just the day of like, this has got to be one of the best days I've ever had in the woods pulling a crosscut saw.
I don't know. I tend to think of them all like that when I can get out. I would probably say the the trips I took with the crew I worked with in Shenandoah, that was probably the best times. I had two or three guys that were regulars that would go out with me, and Shenandoah being a national park for so long, the trees were generally large and there was a lot of complexity, and we'd stand around and think, okay, how are we going to do this? And we'd cross over to the other side of the tree and look at it from a different direction and say, oh, okay, well, maybe that was a good idea, but should we chop it or should we saw it? If it was a pine tree, 100%, it's going to be chopped, because we don't want to gum up our saw. It's going to be sticky, and it'll cut fast. Same thing with tulip poplars. I've cut some mighty big tulip poplars with an axe because they chop so fast. You can take chunks out of them like dinner plates. With those two Atayis, by then, I'll say.
Definitely boost confidence for new folks. So one last question and we'll conclude. So why the crosscut saw for you? Why are you not doing this with, I mean, I know you have chainsaw experience, but what is it about the saw that you prefer and love?
Well, I became a district manager in Shenandoah National Park for the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, and it had both wilderness. I think it had 40,000 acres of wilderness in Shenandoah, and plus about 30 miles of AT. And I found I enjoyed using the traditional tools. I mean, I didn't. Like I said, I would say I'm going to set aside my chainsaw for ice storms. hurricanes and thunderstorm downdrafts because it's such a nasty business. And the rest of the time, even if I'm front country, I'm going to take my crosscut saw, and because I just enjoyed how it felt going through the log. You could hear every little crackle and pop. The tree was telling you what it's going to do. And as you watch the binds develop or the trees start to move, you could quickly adapt to what was happening. A lot of times the chainsaw things happen a little too fast. You couldn't hear what the tree was doing. And so the more I did it, the more I liked it. And I just said, I really prefer using a crosscut saw when I can. I'm the odd man out up here in northern Michigan because there's no wilderness to speak of in the lower peninsula. So all the trails I work on are chainsaw trails, but I will often use a crosscut saw when I go out. I'll talk to people, say, let's do this old school today. And they give me a smile. Yeah, let's do that.
Awesome. Well, okay, then we'll just wrap it up. Thank you, Dan, so much for your time and the work that you do for our traditional tools and training people